am I coming to learn?
Yeah.
Am I curious? Do I want to learn about them? Do I want to learn about how they live? Do I want to learn about the impact and how TRE can help them and how they can help themselves with TRE? And I think that that's the other aspect of humanitarian work that's really critical.
Welcome to the Redbeard Embodiment Podcast. I am your host, Alex Green, and I'm on a mission to bring the power of embodiment to people all around the world. In this podcast, we explore how embodiment practices, trauma healing, and knowledge about the human nervous system can help us find our ground, discover new sources of meaning, and create connection in an ever-changing world. The deepest change is embodied change.
All right. Well, I am excited to be sitting down this afternoon with Joan McDonald, and I am in Boulder, Colorado, where I normally am recording. And Joan is joining us from Prince Edward Island, Canada, which is an island in Canada that I've always wanted to visit, but haven't made it happen yet. But it's on my list in far eastern Canada. And Joan is a registered social worker, a long career in that and education. But why she's on the podcast here today is that Joan is one of the early, I would call it, pioneers of TRE, tension and trauma releasing exercises, and has been with the organization and the educational component of teaching TRE as a modality for a number of years. I don't know the exact date, but Joan will certainly, if she can remember, she'll tell us when she got started with it. But Joan was along with several other kind of key founding members like JC, who was with us a few months back, part of the development of the original curriculum for taking Dr. Berceli's basic method, but then creating an educational framework around it to be sort of used. And that's still the curriculum that's more or less the global certification training program that's still in use kind of worldwide. And Joan was my supervising trainer when I went through the process to become a trainer myself. And so that was actually, I connected with Joan originally at an advanced training in Japan. I don't even remember the year on that. And felt just a warmth and a real expertise from Joan. And so then I was fortunate to take a couple of years doing in almost kind of an apprenticeship model, sort of attending her trainings and as I developed my own teaching style. So in any case, so Joan, what I would love to hear today and is just kind of all the things that led you and that ended up landing, this part of your phase of your career in TRE, some of the stories, challenges, and tribulations of those pioneering days, but then also where things are, where things stand now, where are things going, both in Canada and beyond, and then also hoping to hear about your international experience and the potential that you see for TRE in lots of different applications. So that's just a preview of what I'm hoping we get to cover in our conversation today. But anyway, Joan, thanks so much for taking time this afternoon.
Oh, you're really welcome. Thank you, Alex, for asking me to be part of your podcast. And I was thinking about the podcast today and the last few days, and I've had great fun reflecting on many years of my time in TRE and actually looking at some documents that were created way, way back and just reminding me of the tremendous amount of work that has gone into TRE becoming what it is today, but also the great joy it was for me and for those I worked with. And we were all volunteers back in the beginning. So it was a really memorable part of my career. And so I can start just to tell you a little bit about how I got involved with TRE.
That would be great.
I'm asking people how did you get involved with TRE? Because everyone has a story of some sort,
right?
And sort of my story actually starts in my bioenergetics training. I think it was started in 2003 to 2008. I was in a 5-year bioenergetics psychotherapist training.
Mm.
And a couple of my trainers had gone to a conference in bioenergetics in Carolina, somewhere in 2003 to 2008. And they met David.
Right.
And he was one of the presenters. And he presented TRE. So they were quite excited, and they came back to our training group that summer. And we always had a 7 to 10 day retreat as part of our training. And they introduced us to TRE. And I remember the first time I did it in the context of TRE, because in bioenergetics, there was always we didn't call it tremoring. It was more vibration in the body. We worked with the vibration in the body that often came out of grounding. And so we had this experience. Now, once I knew what TRE really was, the experience really was their understanding of TRE, which
Sure.
wasn't quite TRE, but did have an experience of it then. And I was so excited because back in 2001, I had gone to Nepal, and I spent a couple weeks there with a group that we were studying Eastern religions as well as trekking.
Mm.
And while I was there, I had a very strong pull, awareness, even knowing that I was to bring something back to Nepal that was of a humanitarian nature. But at that time, I had no idea what it was. I was like, what is this?
Mm.
But I never forgot it. And when I was introduced to TRE, I knew this is the thing that I'm going to bring to Nepal. And that was back in around 2008.
Okay.
And so I can go on. David at this time was studying in Arizona, his doctorate. He had a website.
Yep.
He had one little book, and I devoured his website, got his book, and probably maybe 8 months later, I called him.
Ah, okay. Okay.
I found him.
Yep.
And
did you talk to him when he was the presenter, or not really?
No, because the other trainers, the bioenergetic trainers, were at the conference, not me.
Oh, right.
No.
Yeah.
So I just sort of, I was searching for this man because I thought, I want to learn to do this. I want to learn to teach it.
But can I interject? Can I ask just a quick question? Because so and I understand a little bit about the bioenergetic sort of framework, and that was part of David's background as well, and I knew that there's some differences as we what David distilled from that, and even Alexander Lowen kind of said, this is good, focus on what you're doing. So he had kind of gotten that blessing, but I'm curious for you, having been immersed in the bioenergetics, can you say just a little bit more about what stood out to you as a unique, important? What was it that kind of hooked you on this a way of working?
Okay, sure, I can.
Yeah.
Because, and it was, this distinction was critical for me in determining to not go into the final certification process to become a bioenergetic analyst.
Right.
A therapist, and all of TRE.
Yep.
And what it was that TRE's work in the body is just working with the innate mechanism that creates the tremors in the body, and is so pure. And it's not therapy. It wasn't talking.
Okay.
It was just being. And for me, that was absolutely beautiful. And that is really what drew me to it. It wasn't going into all the therapeutic, which is very valuable for many people and at certain times and with TRE, but it was the pureness of the body organically tremoring and following its own wisdom, rather than the provider or the practitioner or the therapist.
I see. Okay, no, that really helps to hear, and it's a little bit how, because I've asked Dave a little bit of a similar question, and that was, he didn't badmouth anything about bioenergetics, but he said, what I became so interested in is just the phenomenon in the body itself, and just seeing what would happen if with other than providing sort of safety and presence, but truly letting the body sort of show and reveal, versus doing some therapy work in combination. So that kind of matches how I've heard him describe it, but that helps me grasp it. So thank you. Yeah.
And the other part for me was also, at that time, I think I was naive, but at that time I also thought, wow, I could take this to a country that I don't have the language for.
Right.
And still somehow engage and connect with and work with the body.
Okay.
So that was the other little other part of it, because that was really what was important to me, because I saw this as something that I could take to Nepal.
Got it. So you all that clicked for you all together.
Absolutely.
Okay. So you called him you read his books, you called him. So keep going with your little journey here.
Well, I called him up and I didn't get to talk to him. I was so excited, and I told him who I was and where I'm from. And I said, I am so excited. I would love, do you have a training program? I want to come and learn TRE.
Right.
And he laughed and he said, no. He says, I don't. So tell me about yourself. So I did. I told my social worker, and I was in bioenergetics.
Right.
He said, Joan, you don't need any training. You just go do it. But he said, no. And I told him I wanted to go to Nepal. And he said, just go. Just do it. And I thought, well, I don't think so. So I said to him, well, is there some other way I could actually at least meet you, watch you do it?
Sure.
And well, the only way is you have to travel with me. And I said, okay. So where are you going next?
Yeah.
He said, Norway in February.
Yep. I
said, okay. Would you like a partner to go with you?
Yeah.
He said, sure. So off to Norway, I went in February. I think Norway I have it written down here, February 2007 or 2008.
Was that with the Chiropractic Association?
Yes. No.
Yeah.
Well, no.
Oh, no. Okay.
No, that wasn't.
Okay.
But he was working with the bioenergetic community there, and had already started in Europe with the first level 3 trainer training, which was a trainer training. He had started that the year before, and he was going back. So I went with him, but they had him. We were there for, I think, about 8 days, 10 days. I was away for 10 days, and we did all kinds of stuff when we were there. It was fabulous. Talk about an immersion in TRE. Yeah. I took copious notes on everything he said and did at that time. Yeah, and actually spent those days with them, and so that was great fun. Yeah,
oh, cool. Yeah.
So that was my training.
I'm curious, sort of, I'm kind of curious for you personally a little bit. I mean, you obviously had probably done a lot of body work via bioenergetics and maybe other stuff too. So you weren't just sort of, fresh to the somatic world. But when what was practicing TRE like for you? Was it helpful, beneficial? Did you sort of learn anything within you in those early days after you had encountered it?
Oh, definitely. So I was a client of bioenergetics for many, many years.
Okay.
I did bioenergetics, my own healing process in my early 30s. And that's actually how I moved into to look at becoming a bioenergetic therapist. Although I actually knew right from the beginning, I was probably never going to certify, but I really loved the learning and the work that we did on our bodies and working with each other. So, So what I discovered, though, the first workshop I went to with David was in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and probably, 2009. And there was a colleague of mine who was in bioenergetics invited David actually to work with her staff. She's a psychologist, and it was Joan Wright, Dr. Joan Wright. And so she knew I loved David. I couldn't stop talking about him. So she said, come over and spend the weekend with us. So I did. And so we tremored, I think there were 2 days workshop. We tremored morning, afternoon. Right. And I had amazing experiences. My whole because I had already been doing a lot of body work, my body was really open. And I was tremoring like crazy. And in those days, you tremored like crazy.
Right. Bigger was better. Bigger was better.
Exactly. Don't talk self-regulation. I'm just if you're tired. But yeah, and I found that somehow there was an integration of a lot of work that I'd already done. Like I felt like there was the psychological work I'd been doing, the psychotherapy I'd been doing, and the body work that we were doing seemed to begin to integrate in a very healing way while I did TRE and doing TREs. So yeah, I loved it. And what I really loved about it is it was my own body. I could do it when I wanted, how I wanted. And I was following my own rhythm of wanting to do TRE. And it was beautiful. I loved it. And I still love it.
Yeah. Wow. Well said. So, all right. So at some point you brought it to Nepal. At some point, the certification program started to coalesce. Which came first? So what was the next step in the road for you?
Nepal was long after. Okay. I never let it go, but it was long after.
Okay.
So when David was in that weekend and he was in Fredericton, New Brunswick, he was invited back in May. So the one was in the fall, September or October. Then he was invited in May, and I went back again. He was doing a public workshop, and a public workshop as well as working with the staff again of that counseling firm.
Right.
So after the end of that weekend, he sat down with Joan and Joan. There were two Joans, Joan Wright and myself. And he said, okay, I would like you two to be trainers for Canada. And we went, what? I went, what? And I said, trainers? Like, what do you mean trainers? And he said, trainers. We're starting to look at having trainers. And I said, oh, okay, great. So can you send us the program? Oh, he said, no, not yet. He said, no, in fact, the first step is you have to develop the program. And so it was like, okay. And he said, and I have two people in the U.S. working on it. And that was JC and Sherry Mills.
Okay.
I want you to meet them. And Joan Wright, very busy woman, a big practice. She was not as engaged in that way of creating the program, but she very much was engaged in early days of having training groups and so on in New Brunswick.
Yeah.
So that was the beginning of me meeting Sherry and JC and discovering they had done some work on a training program and had a training already in Aspen, Colorado, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
And but there was a lot more work to be done. So that was the beginning of us developing the program, the first one.
Right.
Because that was a pilot. They did a pilot just to see how it worked. And so then we took that and continued to develop it. So we had a level 1 certification, which was individual leading, and you got certified as in individual leading, and a level 2 for groups, and you got certified in that.
I see.
That was the very first one. Then after that, we ended up going to having the very first summit in Costa Rica. And that was in 2000 and let me see. I got all these dates written down. 2011.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. 2011, we had the first trainer retreat. Very small. And it was all the people David had anointed. So I always said David anointed the first trainers.
Right.
And all of us were anointed. And because there was no training program for trainers.
Right. Yeah, needed a team. Yeah.
And we had a great time in Costa Rica, getting to know each other from all over the world, from South Africa to Sweden to the U.S., Canada, South America, and so on. So that was cool. And so there were two questions at that meeting. What are the qualifications do we need for trainers? And the other question was, do we need, how or should we have a unified, clear training program globally?
Yeah.
And not only globally, but just a clear program. Because what was happening out there is everywhere David taught TRE, would say, well, you go ahead and teach it. And that person would then start teaching TRE and teaching, and then beginning to teach others to teach TRE. And there was really no standards.
Right.
So, but it was a way of getting things started. So that was the beginning of the training program. And then in 2015, we then created the Global Certification Training Program, which is the present day one.
Okay.
And that one was, and that one got rid of the level 1, level 2.
Combined it into, a certified provider where you learn both individual and group work. The same format we have today, more or less. Yeah.
The other difference was that back in Costa Rica and prior, there was another division, right? There was a facilitator and there was a practitioner. A practitioner was someone who had a professional background and had a governing body that regulated their practice.
Okay.
And then facilitators were people who were teaching TRE as a stress reduction tool, but not in the context of necessarily trauma work.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah. And then that sort of went by the wayside, and then we had a provider.
Right. Yeah. Very cool. Well, organizationally a lot happened. You were part of the trainer support team and that sort of phase of, kind of, which effectively, because you were kind of I think of you as sort of the trainer of a lot of trainers. I don't know how many trainers you've trained, but I know I can count at least 10 on my two hands.
Yes.
So you did a lot of that too. But yeah, maybe just talk a little bit about that kind of, your role in that period.
Yeah, there was, when of course, people need to understand this was David's business.
Right.
And he needed a lot of help to move it beyond just David's business. And so some of us, like Sherry and myself and some others, we were volunteers that supported David in moving TRE out into the world.
Right.
And we developed first what was called a leadership team. And that was Heiner, Mariano, I believe, myself, Sherry, and there were some others that sort of came in and out of that. That team then eventually became the trainer support team.
Okay.
So it was myself, Heiner, Mariano, and David. And again, on that team, we did have one or two people who came in and out of it as well. And that, I probably, of all the trainer support team, became the person who did a lot of the trainer of trainers. And you're right. I probably trained and or supervised over 40 trainers.
Yeah, a lot. And there's maybe only 80, so that's maybe half of the team.
And one time it was all of the team.
Yeah, okay.
Well, not true. That's not really accurate. But yeah. So, and they were from all over the world, like every other countries. And in fact, I hadn't done any trainers in Canada until really recently. And I also worked with a lot in the US as well.
Yeah. Well, so I'm debating between two questions right now. I still wanting to know when and how the Nepal. So we want to hear about Nepal.
Yes, I'll tell you about that.
But I also am curious about, I guess, kind of how you mentioned back in those days, tremoring was big and self-regulation wasn't unless you were tired. So part of me is curious about how you've seen the evolution of, how TRE has grown and matured, I guess, not as an organization so much, but more as the modality itself. Maybe that's a good direction to go.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. I think because tremoring was so unique,
right?
Really, it was like really unique in that the body was doing this itself.
Yeah.
People, I think, and I even think David and some of the very earlier tremors, even than me, was explorative.
Right.
What happens in this body? Where can we go? What can we do to it? What can, and that was really exciting.
Sure.
And also, though, sometimes was way too much.
More than the organism could absorb at that time. Yeah.
That was also the learning.
Yeah.
Is that there was a need for some limitation. There was a need for some boundaries around what people were doing.
Right.
And, but that was all learning. It was all just, we're learning this.
Yeah.
So and the other part of it is that David had, actually really interestingly, he had created a manual way back for a level 1 training. He started to articulate some of the theory behind TRE, some of the pieces of what we're still teaching today.
Right.
But I think a significant thing that occurred was the polyvagal curve, the polyvagal theory.
Sure. Yeah.
Because that theory ended up giving us a deeper understanding of how to understand the nervous system and what was happening in the nervous system and how to talk about it. I think
that's funny. It's funny because what I'm thinking as you say that is because, polyvagal theory, I learned polyvagal theory at the same time I learned TRE in 2015. I must have been in the first class of the certification. But anyway, but what I'm thinking to myself is part of me can't even imagine learning TRE without thinking about the polyvagal theory. Like, to me, they go together. When I'm watching tremoring, polyvagal framework is never not there. So I'm trying to kind of I'm trying to imagine how I would approach it if I didn't have that roadmap. So it's an interesting thing you're talking about.
Well, and it's really true. Like, when I think about my first modules that I was teaching, like module 1, I remember my first module 1, and we had this little bit of manual from David, made my own slides, put in the things I thought I needed. I didn't have a clue. Seriously.
Yeah.
I really didn't. Compared to today, I didn't know anything. But the truth of it was, when people went through that program, they were able to teach TRE. They were able to keep people safe.
Yeah.
Relatively safe.
Yeah.
Because, so in the end, yes. But it's the robustness of the theory that I think has really evolved. And the theory and our understanding has evolved.
Yeah.
And which we didn't have in the beginning, for sure. Yeah. So I think those are, but the polyvagal theory was definitely a critical piece.
Yeah, and maybe this is related to the polyvagal theory, but we talk a lot more about self-regulation and some of the ideas that we have around beginners, sort of how do we think of an initial phase in terms of what are some limits to think about in the beginning, for example, typically not doing more than 3 times a week at most, for the first kind of onboarding phase, or the idea of doing a little bit of tremoring and then coming into rest integration and then returning. So, we have a little bit of this this idea now, or at least where in a way we approach things a bit conservatively in the beginning, not because, for the way I always describe it when I'm working with new people, is say, I care about, if you're going to have big tremors and big releases, that's awesome. But I care less about what happens in today's session than I do over the next few months, because the real benefit you're going to get is if you don't blow yourself out of the water on any one occasion, but you stay with this in a way, that's where the kind of the gains are going to be happening, and your capacity might develop, and you might do longer sessions, and sure, some big experiences might start to emerge. So that's a little bit kind of how I and other people, I think, are holding it these days. And I'm guessing that's a bit different than how it began in some ways. Does that feel true? Or
I think really right from the outset, we were 3 times a week.
Okay.
More than 15 minutes.
Yep.
The time frame was around 15 minutes.
Yep.
I think is no longer maybe the very initial things we tell people, 15.
Yeah.
So that it probably has shifted.
Okay.
But they were the guidelines right at the beginning, right?
Okay. Yep.
And you're right. And I think that it's really interesting because what I have seen is a pendulum swing. The pendulum going from, how did you call it? The rodeo days, or the early rodeo,
the Wild West days. Yeah.
I think it's a lovely metaphor. The Wild West days in TRE.
Right.
And I've seen sometimes, and it has concerned me a bit, that it has swung over to the opposite of the Wild West days, which I don't know really what we call it, but sort of
too controlling, or a little, or not trusting that your body could. Yeah, I see. Yep.
Or not trusting the person knows
right
when and they can.
Yep.
And so, and also the other thing that I've reflected on too is that a lot of overregulating sometimes. And as a result of that, people are not getting the benefit of TRE fully, because unless you can activate and go up the curve, you're not going to come down.
Right.
And it's keeping people at this low level of activation where they're not really accessing some of those deeper traumas. Now, I'm not suggesting people go out and just throw it all out, the baby with the bath, not at all.
Right.
So people need to reflect on that a bit too.
Yeah.
Because I have seen that sometimes with providers, and sometimes it's it can be our own transference sometimes coming up around that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, but it's important to have a balance and to be more midline.
Yeah.
And have flexibility with people.
Yeah.
In terms of what they need. Yeah. I don't know if that answers it, but
no, completely answers it. Yeah. No. And I think that's that idea of the pendulum swinging. And I've certainly seen that too. And it's a bit some of the critique, TRE sometimes has been, people from other modalities, sometimes somatic experience or other ones, have sort of said, oh, well, you're doing too much of this or too much of that. And so, we've had to defend ourselves sometimes in terms of, hey, we do know about titration, and we do know about not, avoiding re-traumatization but we're not going to, but we are also willing to, we have enough trust in the intrinsic wisdom of the nervous system that, it's that there's very much appropriate ranges where people can go through cycles of activation and discharge that actually are very healing and restorative. So I think you kind of naming that to err on either side is I think that's a really important thing to emphasize.
Yeah, and I think what goes with that is sometimes our fear about what's going to happen to someone. And I think too that learning happens when we reach our boundaries. And so clients can learn in TRE, where's my boundary? But if I never go towards the end of my boundary, I never know where it is.
Yeah.
And so, and sometimes, I don't necessarily think it's always not that you intend it, but sometimes people may go over the boundary, but there's a learning in that. Right. And then that learning is very valuable for people. Not that we do it for that reason directly, but if it happens, that's, that happens.
Also part of the learning. Yeah.
Also part of the learning for sure.
For you regular listeners to the podcast, you know that about half of these episodes focus on TRE, tension and trauma releasing exercises. And I wanted to make sure that you know about the Redbeard TRE certification program, our educational platform to certify others. And we have both an online version of that I teach, as well as an in-person version of the training that my colleague Ellen McKenzie teaches in Madison, Wisconsin. My next online certification training is beginning August 3rd and 4th, 2024. That's the first of 3 modules. And the way the certification program works is it's about a 10 to 12 month program divided into 3 phases of learning, each with a weekend connected to it, and then some one-on-one work with me and people on my team to support your learning journey. TRE has been a life-changing modality for myself. It's open to people with any background. I wanted to make sure you know about the program. You can find more information at redbeardtre.com. All right, let's do Nepal. So I gotta hear about Nepal.
Okay. Well, it's actually a fascinating story. So this has been it was like a dream, right? It came to me like a dream, and it lived as a dream for about 14 years. Mm. And I never gave it up, but I never fully actively pursued it. Yeah. So, and what happened was that I had met my colleague and really dear friend, Sai Khani, a few years in Thailand. So I should back up. Because of my dream, I ended up having the opportunity to go to Thailand. I had friends move there. Right. And so in 2009, I think, I started going to Thailand. Okay. And I just went for a couple of weeks visit. Then the next time it was a month. The next time I went for 4 months. Okay. And year after year, I did that. While I was there, I started introducing TRE to people and became like the trainer for Thailand at that time. Thailand was a stepping stone to be able to get to Nepal. Nepal is the big leap for me.
Okay.
And so, and people knew that was my vision. So, and Sai knew that as well. I met her at about 2017 in Thailand, and we became good friends.
Right.
So when the earthquake happened in Nepal in 2014, is it 14 or 15? 2015. That happened. That was the time to go. That was when, okay. And Sai, I remember telling Sai, oh my God, we were supposed to meet on the weekend of the earthquake. And we met, and I said, oh my goodness, we really need to be doing something. Maybe we can help raise money. And she said, Joan, what are you talking about? We're going. Oh my God, yes. Okay, we're going to go. And so actually, she and I went. And we spent 5 months living in Nepal, setting up TRE as a humanitarian project.
Yeah. How did you struck? I mean, I've heard little snippets, but I've never heard the whole story. It's like, I know at some point you connected to the government, and I don't know, at some point somehow Brian got involved. So how did it unfold? How did these 5 months, how did it work?
Well, it was wonderful because Sai worked for Malteser International as a disaster specialist. Okay. That was professional work.
Okay.
We decided to leave her work and come to Nepal. She went in I think she went to Nepal in September. I went in November and December. I went later. While she was there, though, she knew how to network with the NGOs in the country. She knew, and she did it well. And she ended up connecting with an NGO, mental health NGO, national NGO, whose role was to provide psychosocial care, mental health care across the country. So she started teaching them the therapists in that and the staff in that organization, TRE. By the time I got there, we were continuing to do that and decided then we had probably about 6 people or 7 maybe interested in becoming providers. And so we then created a training program for them, as well as we also were connected with a Buddhist school, monastery, for young Buddhist nuns and young children, very young, from 6 upwards.
Yeah. And
we ended up teaching TRE there. And 2 of the staff of the school in the monastery also wanted to become providers. And so they joined in TPO staff, and we ran a program out of our house where we lived in Nepal. And and started the training process there. And we ended up certifying certifying 3 people.
Okay.
Okay. And interestingly enough, all 3 of them 2 of them left TPO. Actually, I think the 3rd one is left as well.
Okay.
And one of them since then, we've been working with her to become a trainer for Nepal.
Nice.
Cool. Sustainability. And that's one of the things that when we do humanitarian work, I think that, people sometimes want to do really good things and want to help and want to spread TRE, especially with people who've been through disaster.
Sure.
But it isn't a kind of thing, and I learned a lot. We just don't drop in and drop out.
Right.
It's a long-term commitment. So for 3 or 4 years after that, I went back, and so did Sai. Between Sai and I, we went back and spent time there with the people who were becoming providers and with the organization there. Brian, you mentioned a provider, and he came.
Got it. On one of those follow-up trips.
Yes. Yeah.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was, for me, a dream come true. I had been dreaming this since 2001, and in 2015, in the 14 and 15, it happened. It was amazing. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Well, and it sounds like, you're staying in touch with them now. One is working to become a trainer. How are they working now? How do they operate presently? The people that you train.
Well, okay, yeah, sure. One of them actually, who was the principal of the school, has since gone back home to Ireland, and she's now, actually, she was just in touch with me and with Marina to get her name on the list of the global certification, or the global TRE.
Directory, yeah.
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 And so she's teaching TRE in Ireland.
Great.
Jamuna is the person that's becoming the trainer, and she left her job with TPO. She was the manager of the mental health team.
Right.
And she's been teaching TRE that's her full-time work.
Got it.
And so she's been teaching a lot of TRE. She's an amazing provider, trainer now, trainee, and doing amazing things and really wonderful. And Sai is working with her because Sai lives in Asia. So it was much easier for Sai to continue working with her under me, but she's her trainer that's working with her.
Yep.
So we're hoping that soon she'll get certified as a trainer. There's a lot of questions around it. She will never probably do necessarily a global certification training program. She will be doing more disaster work and community humanitarian work.
I see.
So there's some questions around what her status will be and all those kinds of things. But in the end, she's teaching TRE, and she'll, it's wonderful. And there was other people we met somebody who had already, from Nepal, had already learned TRE. And he had learned it. I don't know where he had learned it, but anyways, we connected with him when we were there. It's been amazing.
Yeah. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
So, a lot of David's work was humanitarian, even before TRE became, something beyond David. A lot of his work was in Sudan and lots of different places, Middle East and Africa and China, Southwest China after the earthquake there. So a lot of the development of TRE came in those contexts, and that's, I always sort of think that's that's kind of what's baked into the modality is the reason why, we work with not only individuals but also with groups, and we teach them something that can be learned, and then that's not dependent upon an ongoing therapeutic relationship. A lot of these things are sort of part of the DNA of TRE modality, partly because of that, because of the setting and the use of it. Talk a little bit more about sort of your perspective on the suitability or the opportunity maybe of how it is that TRE can be of service in humanitarian kinds of applications. Maybe there's some other examples you're aware of, where other humanitarian work, in Brazil or other places, but also just, how we could even do more of that. It's an area of interest of mine. So I'm kind of asking partly for myself. It's like, what more opportunity could there be?
Well, definitely. Actually, I ended up going with David to Japan after the tsunami, and also in the Philippines after Yolanda, and to Myanmar. So I did those experiences as well.
Okay.
And there was a lot of learning. And I think that, I think even it's the kind of thing that we really need to have some support and training and how to approach TRE in a humanitarian context.
Right.
And it's not just something that is easy to go and do. And the challenge I think we have around that as well is that, humanitarian often means they're not paying you for it.
Right.
So there is that aspect of funding and or committing your own funding, which is what Sai and I did for Nepal, basically. We did a bit of fundraising, but that certainly didn't cover it. But it was a commitment. It was something we really desired to do, right?
Yep.
So, and I think that it's really interesting because in these countries, there is, there's a term that's come to me recently about living in an I society or a we society.
Right.
And in these countries, they live more in a we society.
Sure.
A society where we take care of each other, that we live in a community that really is not just houses in a community, but in a true community.
Right.
And I think that that dynamic that exists in these countries, and then they go through a disaster together, is also part of that dynamic. And what I see happening is that when we're doing TRE in a humanitarian way, working in groups, in community is important, because what needs to happen is we're helping to reestablish the separation, the fragmentation that occurs because of whatever they've been through.
Yeah.
And reestablishing that sense of true community, friendship, connection.
Yeah.
And so it's a whole different, even though that's probably what we're doing in the societies that we live in.
Right.
It's very different in my experience.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and I think, so that's one aspect of it that I think is really learning. The other is that it's the attitude we bring to it, right? Am I coming there to save people, to help people? That sort of that.
White savior mentality.
Colonizing, attitude.
Yeah.
Or am I coming to learn?
Yeah.
Am I curious? Do I want to learn about them? Do I want to learn about how they live? Do I want to learn about the impact and how TRE can help them and how they can help themselves with TRE? And I think that that's the other aspect of humanitarian work that's really critical when we look at doing, it's our own attitudes about it. And sometimes we don't even know we have some maybe attitudes that aren't always helpful. They rise in us sometimes when we're in those experiences. So it's important to have awareness, right?
Right.
To be self-aware and be willing to own when you find yourself maybe not being who you want to be in that situation, because you end up living in those situations as well, and you live in the context of some of these situations, right?
Right.
Which are not always easy for us to live in.
Right. Yeah. Nice. Well, so I know I think you've not done as much travel in recent years. That we've also been just on the other side of the pandemic and the big travel disruptions and all of that. And you've spent a lot of time, a lot of focus in these last several years of really developing the trainer community in Canada. Now you alluded to earlier that there weren't until recently, very recently, there were not very many other or any other Canadian trainers. And so maybe could you speak a little bit to sort of how you've put energy into Canada, but even connecting with this humanitarian theme. Part of my question about Canada is not only this sort of third world countries, but is there opportunity for humanitarian applications in Canada, in the U.S., and how do you see that?
Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of the so in 2019, I started to realize, okay, I've been putting a lot of time and energy into Asia. Asia's doing great.
Right.
All kinds of trainers there now. I really need to think about Canada. And plus, I'm getting a little older, so it's like, I want sustainability in Canada, right?
Right.
And so at that time, I had a number of mentors working with me, and I saw a lot of potential in these mentors to become trainers. So that was the same time that David's program and Donna in the U.S. had a program that was coming together. So It was around the same time. So, I contacted them all and said, I'd be willing to recommend you. Do you want to go into a program with David and Donna? And I'm also willing to work with trainers as well. So a few of the 3 went with David and Donna, and 2 stayed with me. And so in the end of it, we now have 5 certified trainers, very confident, very successful trainers here in Canada. And I chose them specifically geographically as well as tried to have a mix of backgrounds, professional backgrounds as well. And so we have trainer in BC, Vancouver Island, Alberta, Ontario, Quebec, and hopefully Newfoundland. And so we've covered the country with training.
Whole sweep, east to west, north to south.
Yeah. Now, in terms of humanitarian work, actually, our trainers have discussed this at times. Definitely, there can be a lot of value for humanitarian TRE both in the U.S. and Canada. We've had forest fires. We've had, you folks have had the same, all kinds of issues that create stress within communities or within groups of people that really could benefit from TRE and are in crisis. It's sort of when people are in crisis and collective, sort of a collective crisis that's occurring. So, and I think that, in the north can be valuable to go to the north. There's all kinds of ways, but there is, again, I think, challenges that, not that they can't be overcome, but there are more challenges. Funding is one of those things for sure. Yeah. And, to be funded to do it. So, and even to cover your expenses. I mean, a lot of times people are willing to go and offer their time, but to even help out with expenses can be important.
Right. Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. It reminds me a little bit like, this year with David and then with JC and several others, we had the opportunity to work with fire departments, especially particularly the New York Fire Department, which is cool because at least within the U.S., but they're it's kind of a leading fire fighting organization and like working in the military or something like that. It's a population where there's pretty much automatically a lot of stress and a modality that's mostly nervous system, body focused, and not as much talk based actually really appeals to them. That's what they're really saying is that they can do it on their own. They can do it with their own group. They can teach it to one another. And so that kind of is like the example that comes to my mind of kind of a close to home, kind of semi-humanitarian kind of an application. And I think there's been a lot of that first responder work in Canada as well. So that one just springs to mind as an example of kind of communities where it can really be a benefit.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I do know there is a working group here in Canada of providers and looking at the working with first responders. That's their niche. That's the area that they want to focus on, which is a really important area to work on for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. Another question I had for you is, we've mostly focused on TRE, but I know you have interests beyond that. I think you did a certification or some sort of education with the Thomas Hubl organization, and I'd love to hear a little bit about that. I mean, I've been a fan of his work since when his book came out in I think 2021 or 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic, and it was Healing Collective Trauma, maybe is the title. And I know there's been at least one other since then. And I thought, this is a really good framework. And I think you've been very immersed in that. And I wonder if you could just share a bit about your experience with that.
Yeah. Well, I, like you, was during COVID, right? I came back to Canada in 20 and there was a training program, came across my email and it was Thomas Hubl. And I thought, this sounds fascinating. Collective trauma. Didn't even know what collective trauma really meant at the time. And so, I've just really taken a number of his courses. I titled the course, I go for it. And, and it's really been just for my own personal enjoyment and expanding my own understanding and my own growth, actually. So it was fascinating. The first time the first course I was on, he does live working. He calls process. And he works with people. And the working with Thomas is really absolute presence and attunement to the person and very few words, but some words. Mm. And first person he started working with after a while, he asked him, what are you feeling in your body? And the person said, I feel like I'm shaking. Mm. And then I could see the lips go, and the person was trembling, actually.
Right. Interesting.
And I've seen that happen a number of times in his process work.
Yeah.
He doesn't talk about that, but what's happening is that deep safety that you learn in his work to then attune to people in a way that creates that deep safety in terms of the calming of the nervous system, then allows for very deep healing. And so recently I'm just coming to the end of a course on spiritual healing. And this I've been really enthusiastic about. And the last course we did with him was on embodiment of our soul, the soul embodiment of soul. And I was reminded that in this, and this is also another connection with TRE, is that a number of years ago, I had this big insight. I remember this was like huge insight that, my goodness, I think tremoring is about clearing and making space for us to become, for the soul to fully enter into us. And I was like, oh my God, that is so weird. People are going to think I'm weird. I'm not going to say a word to anyone.
Right.
After I did eventually talk to David about it and said, what do you think? And we had a conversation about it. And, but then it came back to me when we were in this course and how we talked about to be able to create space in the body, that we need space, we need openness,
right? And
for ourselves, and that in essence is what his work does: is create space. It heals. That it's about healing his integration of trauma that then creates space, and then that space opens us up to being able to have many other kinds of ways of being in the world, with ourselves and with others. I also love his work around ancestral work as well as collective. So he looks at individual trauma experiences from an individual ancestral trauma, and then the collective trauma into which we're born into. And and he also talks about the nervous system, individual nervous system, our ancestral nervous system, and collective nervous system.
I like that.
And so there's many concepts like that are really fascinating to me to reflect on, to experience in my own self, and and then it somehow integrates and filters into the way I interact and who I am and working with people.
Yeah. Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. Well, what else? Is there anything else that's kind of alive for you right now, or things, or if you're kind of looking ahead over the, kind of looking to the horizon, any projects, intentions, hopes? Well, what's coming next for you?
Well, yeah. It's interesting because I think I'm in a period of transition, right?
Yeah.
And when we're in a period of transition, there can be some endings, some maybe possible beginnings, and it's more neutral, what we call neutral zone of transition time. And I think I'm in that place, which is actually very exciting, because one never really knows. I'm come to a place in myself to know that I don't go out to make things happen anymore in my life. I know it comes to me, and I know that what comes will be the things that I can say yes or no to. And so right now, I do want to spend more time in Asia, but not as a provider or a trainer, or I just want to spend time in Asia. When I was there, I was really working really hard and a lot. And it's sort of like, I just want to, particularly in Thailand, to spend time there. I've connected with was a provider, now the trainer for Thailand and Simba, and they run a retreat center there. And I've been involved with some of the work they're doing there, and they're looking at making changes. So there may be possibility there. I see everything as sort of possibilities right now, and haven't committed to a whole lot of anything. And that's really difficult for me because I'm usually needing to get going. But at the same time, it's been really lovely for me to have a lot more space in my life, and for learning, for reflecting, for just being more being, because I've been a real doer most of my life.
Got it.
So I don't know. There's nothing real specific. I do
Right.
know I'm working with my colleague who was with TRE Canada, and we're reframing what we're doing here in Canada to support the trainers and providers. And so that's really interesting. We're looking at a website that's going to potentially support TRE for the public, as well as for our provider directory. That we run the provider directory for TRE in Canada, the
Yeah.
trainers do the training. So we're working on some really cool ideas around that, but nothing yet that's really finalized. So,
Yeah.
but that's exciting too, because I love creating, and I love creating new things and be part
Yeah.
of the ground floor of that kind of creation. I'm not so good at running things, but I'm good at ideas and creating.
Getting
so.
it built, building it up. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, that,
like Christine's
that-
good at down and out, task oriented, doing things. So we're a good pair that way.
good combo in that regard.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Well,
Yeah.
very cool. Well, Joan, this has been really nice to hear kind of just the whole arc. And again, I knew some of this, but parts I was murky on. So it's really nice just to hear kind of what has guided you, and in that sort of your kind of that knowing that, how you wanted to contribute, and the sort of the trust that the right ways and tools would emerge along the way. So it's really inspiring to kind of hear how you've approached all of that.
Great. Well, thank you, Alex. I really appreciate. It's been fun for me to reflect on this and to talk about it, because I've never really had this kind of conversation with anyone in this way. So I really appreciated the opportunity, and it. I can feel the joy that I feel around my time with TRE, and
Right.
both in terms of organizationally and as well as teaching TRE and a trainer. And it's been a wonderful part of my life that expanded me in ways I never would have imagined. And
Very
TRE
cool.
itself, the training itself has enabled that to happen for me.
Lovely. Oh, very cool. All right. We're going to end on that note here.
Right.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Redbeard Embodiment Podcast. To learn more, visit us at redbeardsomatictherapy.com or send me an email at alex@redbeardsomatictherapy.com. If today's conversation resonated with you, help spread the word by subscribing and sharing with others. Hope to see you next time.